Welcome to our webinar on the Paycheck Protection Program, co-sponsored by Dykema, Consumers Energy, Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce, TCF National Bank. My name is Tom Vaughn, and I'm a member in Dykema's Corporate Finance Group and co-head of our M&A subgroup, and I will serve as your moderator today. You will note that you can submit questions during the program, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible at the Q&A portion of the program at the end. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize the tremendous effort that has been going on around the country for the last 3+ weeks to provide financial assistance to our small business community during the coronavirus pandemic. The efforts of the SBA, the banking community, lawyers, accountants, financial advisors, economic development organizations, chambers of commerce, and many others have been unprecedented and amazing. Joining me today are Patty Poppe, President and CEO of CMS and Consumers Energy, Sandy Baruha, President and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, and of note, previously served as the administrator of the Small Business Administration. Alexis Shostak, a practice group leader for Dykema's Corporate Finance Practice Group, who focuses her practice on financing transactions, regularly representing private equity funds and their portfolio companies, and borrowers and lenders and corporate clients. Tom Schaefer, President and Chief Operating Officer of TCF National Bank. Kyle Sassina, First Vice President, Relationship Manager, Commercial Lending for Chemical Bank, and a member of TCF's SBA PPP Task Force. And finally, Tony Frasca, a member of Dykema's Tax Group, who specializes in tax matters and nonprofit entity law. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Patty Poppe of Consumers Energy for a few remarks.
Thank you, Tom. I'll be very brief, but thank you to the Detroit Regional Chamber. Sandy, you and your team are doing a great source, or are a great source of information for all of us during these very uncertain times, and I'm so appreciative of the leadership and work that you are demonstrating. And thank you to Dykema Gossett and TCF National. Your expertise is just what's required right now, and I'm so thankful to see you leading nationally on this front. We at Consumers Energy have a saying, and that's no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And it is so clear that that is coming to light during these very difficult times. Just a very quick story. I got a text actually on Sunday, March 29th from a good friend of mine who works at Dykema to say, hey, we have information we think would be valuable to small business, but we don't have the relationships with all of the small businesses. What could consumers do? 8 days later, and here we are. We have this amazing partnership. We at Consumers Energy have converted our business customer agents to specifically serving small business customers to help navigate all of the funding that's available, not just for your energy bill, but all of the funding that's available, including PPP. So when I think about the spirit of no one can do everything, but everyone can do something, I'm so proud of how all of us are coming together with this partnership. And so for you small business owners on the line today, I have 3 things that I want you to feel empowered to do during this time. What is your part? Your part is to know that you are not alone. All of Michigan and the whole nation is rooting for your success and for your dreams to come true and to continue through this crisis. Number 2, do not give up. There are resources, there are ways to make it through, and we are going to help you make it through, and we are with you. So do not give up. Keep fighting. And number 3, if you still have questions after this webinar, feel free to call the Consumers Energy business customer line. You can go to our website, but we also have a 1-800 number, 1-800-805-0490, a special line for small business owners to help you navigate this unprecedented time. With this, I just want to thank everyone for your efforts And we'll turn it back to you, Tom.
Great. Thanks very much, Patty. Those are great remarks. Sandy, could you tell us a little bit about what the Chamber of Commerce, the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce, is doing in this area?
Great. Tom, thanks so much. And Patty, thank you so much for making all this happen. The Detroit Regional Chamber is so pleased to partner with our friends at Consumers Energy, TCF Bank, and particularly Dykema for pulling all of this together for this webinar. This webinar is part of the Chamber's COVID-19 Business Resource Center. That's at detroitchamber.com/COVID-19. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, it is a fabulous resource, just as the Dykema resource site, just as the Consumers Energy resource site, just as the TCF site. Everyone is coming together to provide resources that small businesses and businesses of all sizes are going to need during this very unique and challenging time. Particularly the Detroit Regional Chamber site obviously includes resources for businesses of all sizes, but we've also expanded that to include resources for individuals, resources for families, resources for families that have students at home. In fact, just this morning, we were able to feature Detroit Public School Superintendent Nikolai Vitti about what's happening in Detroit Public Schools and what parents can do with their children while they are home. Today's webinar is going to focus on the U.S. Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program, which is a $350 billion program targeted to keep our small businesses afloat and to keep their payrolls intact. As Tom mentioned, I had the honor of running the Small Business Administration for President Bush during the Great Recession a little over a decade ago. And I can say that I have never seen the federal government, and the SBA in particular, put together such a forward-leaning and well-funded program. The federal government, in my opinion, is doing more and leaning forward into this crisis in a way that we have not seen in past crises. Now, while today's webinar is indeed going to focus on the Paycheck Protection Act, I think it's important for all of our listeners to know that there are other programs available to you as a small or medium-sized business, and many of these programs can indeed be combined with each other. One is the emergency loan program passed by the federal government, enacted by the Small Business Administration, that actually preceded the Paycheck Protection Act. These loans, known as EIDL loans, can be used in concert with and in conjunction with the Paycheck Protection Act, and I encourage you to look at that. You'll hear a little bit about the EIDL loan program in today's presentation, but I encourage you to look at that program if the Paycheck Protection Program isn't quite what you need. Also, the state of Michigan has their own Paycheck Protection Act, and they have two programs, one for small and medium-sized businesses and one just for small businesses. And I encourage you to check out the state's website for those programs, because you can access the state program and the US SBA's program without any issue of those two conflicting. And I also encourage you to look at your city or your county, which also have programs that are available, smaller in scope, but all of these programs in many cases are combinable. We can go to the next slide, please. Just want to let everyone know that we have upcoming speakers in our Teletown Hall series, so I encourage you to go to our website and register for them. We obviously have many of our elected officials. We have business leaders such as Patty Poppy, so you get to hear from Patty yet again, Bob Riney from the Henry Ford Health System, and our Director of Health and Human Services here for the state of Michigan. So thank you all for joining us. As Patty said, you are absolutely critical for our economy. We are all counting on you. We are also all cheering for you, and everyone on this call and the organizations that we represent are going to do everything in our power to ensure that you survive, your employees survive this unique challenge, and we all come out of this better and stronger. With that, I turn it back to you, Tom.
Great, thank you very much, Sandy. And by the way, on the Dykema website, on our resource center for COVID-19, we have information on all of the programs that Sandy had mentioned. All right, now we're going to get into the meat of the program, and I am going to turn it over to Alexis Shostak to run us through an overview of the Paycheck Protection Program.
Great, thanks, Tom. I know many of you listening today are familiar with the Paycheck Protection Program. I think I've probably spoken to many of you on the phone already, and may even have applied already. I'm going to provide an overview of the program, and then we'll be available for questions at the end. So what is it? On March 27th, the President signed into law the CARES Act, which included the PPP program, which provides $349 billion to help small businesses retain employees. What type of businesses are eligible? For-profit businesses, 501c3 nonprofit organizations, sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed individuals, veteran organizations, and tribal business concerns. In the statute, the eligibility for for-profit businesses was expanded from just small business concerns to include any business concern with fewer than 500 U.S. employees, or if a larger number, the SBA Small Business Concern Size Test. What are the general eligibility requirements? A business needed to be in operation at February 15th, 2020. You needed to have employees at February 15th, 2020. And then you need to make a representation to the SBA and your lender that the company was impacted by COVID-19. Next slide. So what can PPP loans be used for? The CARES Act lists very specific permitted uses, and those are payroll and certain operating expenses, which are payroll costs, which I'll talk about more on the next slide, payments of interest, but not principal or prepayments on mortgage obligations in effect before February 15th, 2020, rent under a lease agreement entered into before February 15th, 2020, utilities for service, which began before February 15th, 2020, and interest on any other debt obligations incurred before February 15th, 2020. The subsequent SBA guidance indicates that no more than 25% of the loan proceeds should be spent for non-payroll costs, and also that idle loans used for payroll costs must be refinanced into your PPP, and that total amount is still subject to the $10 million cap. Next slide. Since the maximum total loan amount, the permitted uses, and the loan forgiveness aspects of the PPP rest on the definition of payroll costs, let's look more closely at that definition. The CARES Act defines payroll costs to be the sum of payments to any employee that is salary, wage, commission, or similar compensation, payment of cash tip or equivalent, payment for vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave, allowance for dismissal or separation, payment required for the provisions of group health care benefits, including insurance premiums, payment of any retirement benefit, or payment of state or local tax assessed on the compensation of employees. Please note that payroll costs do not include payments in excess of an annual salary of $100,000 for each employee prorated for the covered period. SBA guidance clarified one question that I had been getting a lot, which was whether or not an applicant, a small business applicant, can include in payroll costs the amount paid to independent contractors. And the SBA guidance said that independent contractors are not counted in the employee count, and unless the applicant is the independent contractor, the amounts paid to independent contractors are also not included in payroll costs. Next slide. So what are the terms of the PPP loans? First, for non-seasonal businesses in existence during the period of February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, the maximum loan amount is calculated to be the lesser of $10 million or sum of 2.5 times the average total monthly payroll costs for the past year, plus the outstanding amount of any idle loan made between January 31st, 2020 and April 3rd, 2020, less the amount of the $10,000 advance if you've received one. For businesses not in existence on February 15th, 2019, the first part of that calculation is based on the average total monthly payroll costs for the period of January 1st, 2020 through February 29th, 2020. The other published terms for these loans are the interest rate is 1%, which was the earlier guidance had indicated it was going to be 0.5%, but that was increased to 1% on April 2nd. The repayment terms are for 2 years. No payment, principal or interest, is due for the first 6 months from the date the loan is made, though interest still accrues. No collateral, no personal guarantees are required, and prepayment is permitted at any time without any fee. Next slide. Now the part that I think is probably most interesting to most of you on the call, the loan forgiveness aspect. So what is eligible for loan forgiveness? So amounts paid under the loan during the first 8 weeks after the loan closing will be eligible for forgiveness if used for payroll costs, interest on any covered mortgage obligation incurred before February 15th, 2020, rent obligations on lease agreements in force before February 15th, 2020, or utility payments for which service began before February 15th, 2020. Note that one of the permitted uses that I talked about earlier was that you could use the proceeds of a PPP loan to pay interest payments on other debt. But while that's a permitted use, those payments would not be eligible for forgiveness. Next slide. There are still limitations on loan forgiveness. First, the amount forgiven may not exceed the principal amount of the loan. And while not specifically in the statute, SBA has issued guidance indicating that only up to 25% of the forgiven amount may be used for non-payroll costs. There are 2 additional limitations based on employee headcount and salary. The first is that the amount forgiven will be reduced by any decreases in full-time equivalent employee headcount calculated by dividing the average monthly full-time equivalent employees of the company between February 15th through June 30th of this year by, for non-seasonal employers, you can pick either to divide by the average monthly full-time equivalent employees between February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, or for the period between January 1st, 2020 through February 29th, 2020. The other limitation or reduction limitation is that the amount forgiven will be reduced if between February 15th and June 30th of this year, for a particular employee, there is more than a 25% reduction of salary or wages of an employee paid less than $100,000 as compared to that employee's compensation during the last quarter that they were paid. However, the Act and the guidance do provide that reductions eliminated if you rehire employees or restore the salary for any layoffs or salary reductions that occurred between February 15th and April 26th of this year, if those are restored by June 30th, 2020, the amount of loan forgiveness will not be reduced. One other reduction is to the extent that you did receive the $10,000 EIDL grant, the amount that is forgiven will be reduced by that amount. Next slide. So how do you apply? So unlike the EIDL program, applications should be made directly to SBA approved lenders, not the SBA. For small businesses and sole proprietorships, applications are already being accepted as the program opened on April 3rd. Independent contractors and self-employed individuals can apply beginning this Friday, April 10th. The deadline is June 30th, 2020, but early application is encouraged as the SBA has indicated that the funds are first come, first serve. So our advice would be, to the extent you haven't already done so, to contact your existing banker to understand their process for handling applications, as each bank really has its own process at this point. Tom, back to you.
Great, thank you very much, Alexis, and I'm sure we will have many questions for you at the end on the details of the program. I'm now going to turn it over to Tom Schaefer and Kyle Cecina of TCF Bank to talk a little bit about how TCF Bank is handling the program. Tom or Kyle?
Good morning. This is Kyle Cecina. Can you hear me?
We can, Kyle. Thank you.
At TCF Bank, we strive to deliver superior performance to our customers, and during this difficult time, our team has worked tirelessly to simultaneously connect with our clients and to develop a robust loan process system. This system will allow us to accept and process applications quickly and efficiently. It will get those funds out the door rapidly during this time of need. So I'll go into some of the detail on my slides. There are some things that have already been covered, so I'll go past that and try to provide a little detail where applicable. So next slide. Okay, so I think we've touched on the loan terms, maximum amount of 2.5 times payroll, up to a $10 million cap. Anything that's not forgiven, 2-year term, 1-year fixed rate, payment deferral for the first 6 months. A couple things, businesses with less than 500 employees per location. There's some initial detail on specific NAICS codes, which we'll touch on later. Self-employed and independent contractors. And then it talks about the self-certification of adverse COVID business impacts. For those application requirements, a borrower must certify that the business was in operation on February 15th, 2020 and had employees who were paid wages and incurred payroll taxes or paid independent contractors via a 1099. An applicant business must also certify that the uncertainty of the current economic conditions make necessary the loan request to support the ongoing operation of the business, that the funds will be used to retain workers, maintain payroll, or make rent, mortgage, or utility payments, and that the application has not and will not receive another loan under the PPP. So that's the self-certification that'll be included in the application that people receive. We touched on eligible loan usage already. The loan forgiveness, I know this is something people are very concerned about. You will have to document spending an eligible cost for 8 weeks after the loan origination. Forgiveness reductions, which were touched on a little bit earlier, include headcount reductions, wage decreases in excess of 25%, or improper usage of funds. For that forgiveness, you must apply to the bank with a supporting documentation. Your banker will get to you prior to that flipping to P&I with the documentation they need to apply for the forgiveness. So you won't have to worry that you're flipping to P&I before that's occurred. And your bank will have its own loan policies on the documentation they want to receive and how they get that to you. Next slide. Eligibility, I think we've touched on this. Nice thing about this program is religious organizations, churches in particular, are included. There are tribal business concerned that meet the SBA size standard. We also like to highlight a 501c19, the veterans organization that meets size standard, and primarily NAICS codes beginning with 72, food services, hospitality businesses. We know restaurants have been heavily impacted by this, and there was a modification for the size standard to allow it to be less than or equal to 500 employees per physical, 500 or less employees per physical location for NAICS codes beginning with that 72, which is a deviation from what was previously outlined. Next slide. Okay, so here's the application process. This will vary from bank to bank. I'm proud to say that at TCF, our application process is up and running. We've already collected applications. So the best way to start is to contact your bank. Hopefully you've all been in touch with your banker multiple times over the past couple weeks. Most banks have an online application. I know we do. We have a COVID section on our website. You go straight to the application, you click the get started. It's very easy. Before you want to get your application ready, you really want to gather the documentation you need to complete that information, and we'll touch on that in a minute. Once you have that ready, your advisors, your CPAs, your attorneys, your payroll companies, they should be helping you get that information ready. Next, you're going to complete the application. Once you've done all the due diligence, it's really easy. I said 20 minutes, and honestly, I think that's a bit generous. A lot of people have been completing it in 10 to 15 minutes. They complete the application, they upload the documentation, and get that going. I know with my clients, we tested it. We've been able to upload phone photos, things like that. So it works really well. And then you wait for the disbursement. A bank can approve and fund the loan quickly. I say times will vary because it's really a challenging time right now, and there's so many mitigating factors. But a sample process would be the customer would complete the application, and then for us, it's going to be loaded into a system. There'll be a review of that, and then it will have to be, for all banks, you will have to submit that to the SBA's E-Tran system, and that will generate a loan approval. Once the SBA and E-Tran generate approval, a loan number will be issued by the SBA, and that's used for the SBA authorization document. At that time, your funds are locked in. So I know everybody's concerned about the funds. There's a cap on the funds right now. We expect Congress would increase it if they need be, but I know a lot of people want to get in on the initial number. So once you have that loan number and authorization, you're set. Then your bank will process documentation. They'll get the documents sent to you. We personally are taking electronic signature on our documents, and upon receipt, bank's receipt of those documents, they have to be reviewed, and then funding takes place. And then the bank boards it on their system, and you'll be able to get updates on your loan. So next slide. Okay, these are the application documents. So it's been a little murky on the documentation. Is it, February of 1919 to February 2020? Is it 2019? At this point in time, we're using 2019 tax documentation to support the payroll numbers. It's very simple, easy to do. Payroll registers that detail gross wages for each employee. I know ADP and several other companies are providing this information readily to their clients. If you're an independent contractor, you want to have your 1099 ready. You need to have documentation showing your total group health insurance premiums, documentation showing a sum of the retirement plan, names, titles, ownership percentages, social security numbers and addresses for all 20% owners, a copy of a driver's license for all 20% owners, total number of both part-time and full-time employees as of February 15th, 2020, and bank deposit account numbers. That's really important, so we make sure you get those loan proceeds. A couple of questions that I've been inundated with on the application is, what do you do with a nonprofit? Or what do you do when there's, for example, I have a physician's practice where no one has 20% or greater ownership. Then you're going to select the individual that would be the assigned signer for the institution, who will sign on behalf. And then you'll put that information and answer those 8 questions for that individual. And then that will generate the documents, because there has to be some information on there for somebody who's going to sign on behalf of the organization. So for a church, other nonprofits, you're going to want to have your designated signer and answer those questions for that individual. Next slide. Okay, so advice for your borrower. Work directly with your primary bank, where you have loans. If you don't have loans, where your operating accounts reside. That relationship manager should be essential for you. It should be frequent communication with them. They're really going to be able to guide you through the nuances of each bank's program. Begin gathering the documentation needed. We have a lot of experts that are on this call your attorney, your CPAs, your payroll companies. They're very well versed in this, and they're going to help you. Please move with urgency. There is a cap on the funds. We expect that Congress would approve more, but we want to get this to people as quickly as possible. We want to see you on the other side and help your businesses continue to be successful and get through this tough time. And then for our additional resources, I've listed our bank website that can be of additional information. Next slide. Okay.
Hey, Tom, if I could, are you able to hear me? Tom Schaefer.
We can, Tom.
Great, thank you. I wanted to, first of all, Kyle, appreciate the guidance that you've given listeners on this. And the one thing I'd say is that with this health crisis, which is now clearly a national and international financial crisis, I've never seen more alignment between national legislation, Treasury, SBA, but it's well beyond that. You know, it's down at the state and local level, the programs, and Patty mentioned this, but there are programs at the county level and at the state level to help you through this. Our federal regulators have also clearly leaned in to make sure there's alignment with the purpose of making sure that once this crisis ends, and the medical side of this is going to be, we can measure how long, if we watch the countries that are ahead of us, how long we're going to have this. But getting all of you through this cash flow crunch, we've moved dramatically faster than we did during 08 and 09 to make sure cash flow exists. Part of it is programs like this. The other part, I would say, work with your banks for deferrals, both at the individual level and corporate level, because the regulators, for the first time in at least 40 years that I can recall, have acknowledged the reality of the immediacy and timeline associated with this, and to help you get through this cash crunch, work with your banks for deferrals so that you can retain as much liquidity as possible for those expenses that are required during this next 90 or 120-day time period. Tom, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tom. That is great. Hey, one thing that I have been talking to my clients about as it relates to the banks, if for some reason you are going to a bank for your PPP loan that is not your primary lender, you need to be careful, because under your existing loan agreements, you may have restrictions on the incurrence of indebtedness, and you may need a waiver from your existing lender. So just something for people to be aware of out there. The SBA lenders that are providing the PPP loans are not required to go back in and look or check whether you have other restrictions on undertaking loans. So that's up to you as the borrower to know. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony Frasca to talk about the unprecedented nature of this program because of its application to nonprofit entities.
Hi, yes. So as discussed earlier today in the presentation, the Act extends the Paycheck Protection Program to tax-exempt nonprofit organizations that are described in Section 501c3. For purposes of the Act, a nonprofit organization is defined as being any organization that is described in Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code and that is exempt from taxation under Section 501a. So in detail, this means that a nonprofit organization to qualify must, one, be described under 501c3. So that's generally including in its definition any corporation or foundation that's organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, literary, or educational purposes. It's notable that it does not include organizations sometimes referred as social welfare organizations that are typically described under 501c4. In order to qualify, an organization must also be exempt under Section 501a, which generally means that the organization has received recognition of exemption from the IRS. So that means that the organization really should have a determination letter, and that would be the letter received by the organization when the original application for tax exempt status was filed from the IRS. Some organizations, if you look through your files and you can't locate that determination letter, one place to go to find one is you can check the IRS's exempt organization search website. And so for some organizations, that determination letter is published there. So that website, it's You can Google IRS exempt search, but the website is apps.irs.gov/app/EOS. So that's apps.irs.gov/app/EOS. That's a good place to go to search to find a copy if you don't otherwise have one. And if the determination letter is not available there, it's notable that the website itself does display the IRS's current status of an organization as being exempt, and so that might be sufficient to prove exemption. Normally it's not, but especially in this time, it might be deemed as appropriate. One notable exception to the need for determination letter, though, is with respect to churches. So it's important to note that Section 508C of the code specifically states that organizations that are churches, integrated auxiliaries, and conventions or associations of churches do not need to receive a determination letter from the IRS in order to be exempt under 501A. So those organizations should qualify and should qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program without having a determination letter, without having to share that. In addition to those qualification standards, a nonprofit organization must also meet the standard of having, when combined with its affiliates, 500 or fewer U.S. resident employees. For determining qualification under the Small Business Act, there are various affiliation rules that ordinarily apply to aggregate businesses with overlapping ownership or control. And Tom Vaughn is going to discuss that in general next, but specifically with respect to nonprofit organizations, an interim final rule was released over the weekend, which deals specifically with faith-based organizations, where the application of the affiliation rules are specifically exempted from application to faith-based organizations, where those rules would, quote, substantially burden an organization's religious exercise, end quote. And that's not something that is found under the Act itself. In fact, that's something that's been added on by the administration specifically under these rules, these interim rules. And the interim rules do go into detail as to why constitutionally and under the Religious Restoration Act, the administration feels that it's essential to exempt faith-based organizations from the affiliation rules. What's notable here is that the interim final rules specifically state that a faith-based organization seeking loans under the program may rely on a reasonable good faith interpretation in determining whether its relationship to any other person, group, organization, or entity is exempt from the affiliation rules under this provision, and the SBA will not assess and will not require participating lenders to assess the reasonableness of the faith-based organization's determination. So it goes pretty, the definition here or the application here is pretty broad, and it leaves it really to organizations to make a good faith decision for themselves of whether or not the affiliation rules should apply. One additional note I wanted to make is that for directorship nonprofit corporations, and really for any other entity here, make sure that you have the necessary board approvals to apply for a loan. And I think this is just more important for nonprofit organizations that may not necessarily be used to this process, and to make sure that you have the board on the phone or at the ready and able to approve the loan application and the loan agreement if and when necessary. Next slide.
Great. Hey, thank you very much, Tony. And this is Tom Vaughn again, and I'm going to address the SBA affiliation rules. The SBA, in defining what constitutes a small business, has developed affiliation rules that require you to include your affiliates when determining whether you meet the SBA size requirements, including counting the number of employees that you have. Essentially, if you control another business, or another business or a person controls you, you have to combine the employees of that business with your employees in determining if you have less than 500 employees. The SBA has very complex rules in defining control. So while owning a majority of the equity of a company constitutes control, owning less than a majority may still be control based upon a number of factors such as family relationships, contractual rights, identity of interest, common management, economic dependence, common investments, and something called totality of the circumstances, which is a bit of a catch-all category. So if you have any concerns that your business might be affiliated with other businesses, and if they were, that would take your employee count over 500, I encourage you to call an attorney to get them to help you navigate through these SBA rules. All of us for the last week have been learning these rules, that we haven't been dealing with them and really digging into them deeply. They're very complex. Most businesses are going to have trouble finding their way through them by themselves. Next slide, please. There are some exceptions to the affiliation rule application to PPP that are listed on this slide. I note the PEO, you're not going to be affiliated with your employee leasing company. The CARES Act has provided some very specific exceptions for NIAC code 72 companies, which are generally hotels, food service and hospitality companies, as well as for franchises. If your franchise is on the SBA directory, and I know that there are a number of franchise companies that were not on the directory previously that are working quickly to get their companies on the directory. Great. We're now going to move to the question and answer portion of the program. And we have been flooded with many questions, so that if we don't get to your question today, there are a number of resources available to you. First is the Dykema Resource Center, which is focused in on COVID-19 issues. We have a team of lawyers keeping up to date on all of the developments, and we are regularly issuing alerts on the topic. If you can go on our website, you can subscribe for our alerts and you will receive them as soon as they come out. Next slide, please. Also, each of our sponsors have websites, as they have mentioned before, with information to help you. And of course, feel free to reach out to any of us by email or phone. We are very glad to help you navigate your way through this program or other COVID-19 related issues. This time, I'm going to ask Devin O'Reilly of the Detroit Regional Chamber to lead us through the question and answer portion of the program. Devin?
Thanks, Tom, and thank you to the fantastic panel that we have today. We're getting, as you mentioned, we're getting a really strong response and questions and lots of different ones. So in looking at some of the themes, a lot of it is kind of clarifying some of the key points. And one of the questions that we've gotten a lot is regarding the $100,000 cap in the employees. And a lot of the questions have been around, is that a solid 100K cap in the salary only, or are you taking into account premiums, retirement, health costs, things like that? So there was a lot of questions about that $100,000 cap of employees.
Alexis, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, so the way the statute reads is that it says salary over, the salary has to be under $100,000. So we have been reading it to just be salary. I would ask, TCF if they could respond to see if that's consistent with how they're calculating the maximum total amount.
That's the same read for us.
Thanks, Tom.
Great, that's very helpful. We also had a lot of questions on when the money will be distributed. When can businesses expect receipt of the funds? Any insight on that would be helpful.
Kyle?
You want to talk about that?
Sure. Like I said, there's a lot of mitigating factors. Best case, I could see some of these getting out in a couple weeks and much faster. It's really going to vary on the institution. When they get the application in, we have to make sure that eTran, which is the SBA site, is up, running, not crashing. Then you get the SBA approval number and documents. In a perfectly well-oiled system, I can see this going start to finish in a week for some people. With other challenges, though, please be patient. People are going as fast as they can. You know, there's other things that can happen. Sites can go down, things can crash, new information can come out. So
I think that's. I mean, the reality is that we're in the very early stages of this. I think in about 10 days, when both the banks and the SBA are processing these, it's going to pick up rapidly. But because the banks are processing these for the first time and the SBA is processing for the first time this program, while it's part of 7A, it's a brand new program. That I think that a little patience at the beginning, but it'll pick up rapidly over the next couple of weeks.
Great, fantastic. Following up on that, we also had a lot of questions come in about the flexibility of the date. So there were some questions around, can I select a date for when I want the PPP loan to start or when I want things funded? Is there any flexibility on choosing a date and the timing of receiving these funds or when they want things to start getting counted?
Hi, this is Kyle. You could.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kyle.
I was going to say yes. You could. Once you have your SBA approval, it's up to you and your banker to decide when you disperse funds.
Okay, great. And so, yeah, following up on that, there was also a lot of, should they wait? Is it? I know it's it's still to be determined, but there seem to be some questions around hesitation. Should we wait? Should we apply now? What's the best advice on hesitating or just making sure that you get your application in as soon as possible?
Yeah.
Get your application in. Get it started. Get your application in.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I know all of my clients are getting their applications in. I think everybody wants to make sure that they're getting in the processing. My sense is if you have a bank loan officer or a bank officer that you deal with regularly, some of these details like the timing and whatnot, you're going to be able to work with them to control that part of the process.
I think if I get it started, because think about, $350 billion is going to move out in 90 days. And, there will be, at different points, some choke point somewhere. And the faster you get in, beginning of, your request processed, I think it's important. And while we're told that the federal government will refund or will, do a second tranche of funding for this program, and I believe that they will, but I'd rather not rely on that for any of our clients or our region.
The one thing that we haven't touched in on this program presentation, though, is the one thing that companies do have to do. There is something called the employee retention credit, and you cannot take a PPP loan and take the employee retention credit. And so one thing that companies should be doing, I'd say put your application in to get it in the queue, but if you have not looked at the employee retention credit, you should be doing a calculation of whether that provides a better benefit for you than the PPP program. We're finding that companies that have large numbers of lower wage employees, sometimes the employee retention credit is better than the PPP program.
Okay, great. Good information. Thanks. Another kind of clarification that we're looking for. This has to do with your headcount. And so, for instance, if employees quit during the 8-week period, or if you're, if you have employees that want to go on unemployment or stay on unemployment, how will that affect the loan?
I don't know, Alexis, are you going to address that?
Well, so right now there isn't additional guidance yet from the SBA on this point. I mean, the way we're reading the loan forgiveness reduction piece, it's just it's the average monthly full-time equivalent employee headcount. So I think you probably do, at least as of now, since there's no de minimis test, if somebody quits, have to hire somebody else.
Okay, great. And we also had some questions following up on that. If for whatever reason the head count, the employee count does get reduced during that time, does this just revert to a normal loan that needs to be repaid?
So at the
Actually,
oh, sorry, you can go, Kyle.
no, go.
So I mean, the loan from the beginning, let's be clear, I mean, the loan from the beginning is a normal loan that needs to be repaid. There is the loan forgiveness aspect that as long as you use the money in the 8-week period following when you get the loan, that you're eligible to apply for forgiveness. But the loan terms are what I went through on the slide describing the loan terms. You do get a 6-month payment deferral, but at the end of the process, once you apply for forgiveness, whatever amount is not forgiven does have the same loan terms that we talked about previously of sort of the 2-year period to pay it back at 1% interest. You know, so it's the terms are what the terms are.
Sure. No, that's helpful to kind of revert back. I think we've had some people jumping on at different points in the call, so thank you for that. There was a few questions, a lot of sole proprietors. So a sole proprietor who has no employees, they're the sole employee. How would they calculate payroll?
Yeah, Kyle or Alexis, would you like to try and answer?
So I think you go back to I think you'd have to give your tax returns, and we'd have to look more closely at the statute. And I don't know, Kyle, if your system is set up yet to look more closely at calculating for sole proprietors.
I haven't started calculating on those yet. That'll be later this week, but we hope to have a calculation worksheet out for that. But like you said, I'd refer to the tax documentation to start getting that ready.
Yeah, the one thing I would say to all the self-employed individuals and sole proprietors out there, I think the last week has been very much of a focus in on the other business concerns. And now that we're all are catching up on that, I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of focus this week on how all of this affects self-employed individuals, because we all knew we had until the 10th to get your applications in. So be patient with us. We're trying to work through all of the details on this.
All right, and I'll just end with one last question because I know we're running out of time here. But there was a lot of questions on calculating FTEs, and so just any kind of clarification on the formula for kind of calculating FTEs and full-time equivalents.
So there
Kyle,
isn't any. Oh, sorry, you can go, Kyle.
I was going to say we are including both the full-time and part-time FTEs, and we're looking at the date of February 15th, 2020 for us.
It's head count, they're not FTE.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Head count.
So does the question go to the? I think the question is whether or not the question goes to calculating payroll costs for the maximum amount of the loans, or is it a question of the loan forgiveness reduction piece? I think that's really the clarification, because I think the answer may be different, because in total employee count, it is full-time, part-time, temporary. In terms of the loan forgiveness aspect, that does go towards reductions in total head count and salary for just full-time equivalent. I think if there are additional questions, checking with your employment lawyer on how to calculate the full-time equivalent employees may be the best advice at this point.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's great advice, because there are a lot of different questions around that. But so it looks like we're just about out of time. Just the last few questions that I got were around getting access to the slides and to this webinar. So Tom, I'll throw it back to you. Maybe you want to just those are the individuals who jumped on the call late, if they can access these slides and if they can access this webinar afterwards.
Yeah, great. And that was my first point on my closing remarks. So great question.
Perfect.
This webinar has been recorded, and the slides and the recorded webinar will be available on the Dykema website. and we will push it out to our other sponsors as well, and they can put it up on their website. But it will be available, and certainly you are welcome to pass it on to others. We did the slides intentionally very detailed so that they themselves would be a resource, as you're working through your application. So I'd like to take the time now to thank our panelists for taking their time out of their very busy schedules to join us, and our sponsors. I know particularly the people at TCF are working very, very hard to get all of those applications processed and the money out. And I would like to thank our sponsors, Dykema, Consumers Energy, Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce, and TCF National Bank for joining us today, taking the time with us. And what I tell all the participants is, please watch out for additional webinars that all of us may be providing in the coming weeks as we find material and information we think will be useful to do in this format. We are doing webinars, and there could even be follow-up webinars on this very topic. So I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today, and good luck, and hope you stay safe. Thank you very much.